The air in the lobby of Sterling and Finch was so thick with money and ambition you could almost taste it. It was a cocktail of polished mahogany, expensive cologne, and the hushed, urgent rhythm of a city's heartbeat. Ilara Vance adjusted the cuffs of her jacket, a sharp, custom-tailored power suit she had saved for months to buy. It was her armor for today, her first day as a junior analyst. She had chosen it for its timeless elegance and the quiet confidence it exuded. A perfect blend of classic and modern, a charcoal gray masterpiece with subtle pinstripes and a flawlessly cut silhouette. It was a suit that said, "I belong here." As she stepped into the elevator, she found herself alone, a moment of quiet before the storm. She took a deep breath, reciting her resume in her head, double-checking the location of her office. The door slid open on the executive floor, and the world shifted. It wasn't just quieter, it was more focused, every movement deliberate, every gaze sharp. Ilara navigated the maze of corridors, her heart a steady drumbeat against her ribs. She was looking for Mr. Harrison, the senior partner she was assigned to. That's when she saw him. He was standing in front of a panoramic window, his back to her, a titan silhouetted against the cityscape. He was talking on the phone, his voice a low, commanding rumble, and then she noticed the suit. Her breath hitched. It was identical to hers. The same charcoal gray, the same subtle pinstripes, the same impeccable cut. It was a sight so jarring, so utterly unbelievable, that she simply froze in her tracks. He wasn't just a random executive. He was the CEO, Julian Sterling, the man whose face was plastered on every business magazine, the genius who had turned Sterling and Finch into a global powerhouse. He ended his call and turned, his gaze sweeping over her. For a moment, his stern, aquiline features softened with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, seemed to lock onto her suit, and then her face. An electric current, silent and powerful, passed between them. It was a fleeting, impossible moment of connection, a shared recognition of the absurdity of the situation. He gave a curt nod and walked away, the powerful sway of his coat mirroring her own. Ilara felt the weight of 1,000 eyes as she walked back from the executive floor. The silent, almost psychic connection with Julian Sterling was gone, replaced by the very real, very audible whispers of her new colleagues. They weren't cruel, just a mix of awe and speculation. Did you see that she heard someone whisper? On her first day? No less. Talk about making an entrance. Another voice, more cynical, added, she must have a death wish. Nobody upstages the CEO and gets away with it. Ilara's cheeks burned, but she held her head high, her custom-tailored armor feeling less like a shield and more like a target. Julian Sterling, meanwhile, was sequestered in his office, a sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the city. He was a man of logic and control, a master of data and strategy. Yet, he found himself utterly derailed by the image of a young woman in a suit that was, for all intents and purposes, his own. He buzzed his assistant, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Davies. "Find me the new hire on the 21st floor," he commanded, his voice betraying none of his internal turmoil. "The one with the gray pinstripe suit." Ms. Davies, a woman who had seen it all, didn't flinch. "I'll have her file on your desk in 5 minutes." "Mr. Sterling?" Julian stared out the window, his mind replaying the fleeting moment in the hallway. The suit was more than just clothing to him. It was a ghost, a silent tribute to his late father, the original owner of the design, a design Julian had replicated exactly, believing it to be a unique heirloom. To see it on a stranger, a woman with a face he couldn't quite place, was an impossible paradox. It felt less like a coincidence and more like a sign, a question he couldn't answer. Who was she? Ilara, for her part, was determined to prove that she was more than just the girl in the CEO's suit. She was a rising star, a mind full of sharp insights and untapped potential. She buried herself in her first project, a deep-dive analysis of Atlas Ventures, a rival firm that had suddenly and inexplicably become a formidable threat in the market. The task was complex, the files were dense, and she welcomed the distraction. It was a labyrinth of financial data, and she was in her element, a detective of numbers. Ilara, a detective in a world of digits and data, dove headfirst into the labyrinth of Atlas Ventures' financial records. Her initial hunch, a quiet whisper in the data, grew into a roaring alarm. She found a series of transactions, small enough to be overlooked by a cursory glance, but frequent and consistent enough to be a deliberate pattern. They were funneled through a network of shell corporations, each one a dead end, a false flag designed to obscure a deeper truth. This wasn't just a competitor making aggressive moves, it was a hostile takeover from the inside. Someone within Sterling and Finch was actively aiding Atlas Ventures. As she pieced the puzzle together, a cold dread began to set in. Her digital files, meticulously organized and cross-referenced, started to disappear. Not all at once, but one by one, like a ghost plucking pages from a book. Her computer, normally a sleek, efficient machine, would freeze or restart at random, wiping her progress. The IT department, after a brief and fruitless investigation, dismissed it as a technical glitch, a common occurrence in a company of this size. But Alara knew better. This was targeted. This was personal. The digital sabotage soon became physical. A cryptic, handwritten note appeared on her desk one morning. A single line scrawled on a folded napkin. "Stay out of business that isn't yours." The words were simple, yet they held the weight of a silent, chilling threat. Alara felt a prickle of fear crawl up her spine, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce surge of defiance. She was closer than ever to the truth, and someone knew it. The very act of the threat confirmed her suspicions. The threats escalated. A cup of coffee, left on her desk, had been laced with a bitter-tasting, non-toxic substance, rendering it undrinkable. Another time, the chair at her workstation was subtly tampered with, causing her to fall heavily. Each incident was plausible as an accident, yet the chilling consistency of them painted a different picture. She was being watched. Someone was playing a game of cat and mouse, and she was the mouse. She began to carry her work home, creating a backup of everything, working late into the night, shielded by the anonymity of her small apartment. The suit, once a symbol of her ambition, was now a uniform for a war she was fighting alone. She was no longer just an analyst, she was a secret agent, a solitary soldier in a high-stakes corporate battle. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that the enemy was not a rival company, but a snake coiled within the very heart of Sterling and Finch. The snake, Alara realized, had a face and a perfectly tailored suit of his own. His name was Marcus Thorne, a senior analyst who occupied the corner office, a man who moved through the company like a king in his court. He was handsome in a predatory way, his smile a flash of sharp teeth, his eyes a chilling, calculating blue. He was a protege of the old guard, a man whose ambition was a barely contained fire, and he saw Alara not as a colleague, but as an infestation, a bug to be squashed. Marcus's animosity towards her had been a quiet hum since her first day. It started with subtle dismissals in team meetings, a pointed clearing of the throat when she spoke, a flick of the wrist to indicate her ideas were a waste of time. He'd make snide remarks about her inexperience or her naivete, always with an audience, always with a venomous smile that made the words cut deeper. He was a master of passive-aggressive hostility, and his jealousy was as clear as the glass walls of his office. He believed he was the heir apparent to Julian's inner circle, and Ilara, with her fresh perspective and undeniable talent, was a threat he couldn't abide. One afternoon, as Ilara was meticulously cross-referencing her findings, Marcus sauntered over to her desk, a sneer playing on his lips. He leaned over, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that only she could hear. "You know, little girls playing dress-up shouldn't meddle in big boy business," he said, his eyes cold and devoid of all warmth. "You're a junior analyst, not a detective. Stick to your spreadsheets and leave the real work to the professionals." He didn't need to specify what real work he was talking about. Ilara felt a shiver of fear, a confirmation that her suspicions were correct. He was the one behind the sabotage. He was the one who had left the note. He had a motive, the means. And now, the outright arrogance to confirm it. His words, meant to intimidate, only solidified her resolve. The game was no longer an abstract corporate battle. It was a personal vendetta between her and a man who saw her as nothing more than a minor obstacle in his path to the top. The suit, once a symbol of her ambition, was now a uniform for a war she was fighting alone. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that the enemy was not a rival company, but a snake coiled within the very heart of Sterling and Finch. A snake with a familiar, handsome face. Alara's investigation into the company's finances was a war she was now fighting on two fronts: the covert sabotage from Marcus and her personal quest to understand the bizarre connection of the suit. She had a new lead: the suit itself. She carefully examined the inner lining of her jacket, finding a small embroidered signature: Mr. Fitzwilliam, Bespoke Tailoring. It was a clue, a thread to be pulled. She spent her lunch break scouring old city directories and the internet for the name. It wasn't easy. Mr. Fitzwilliam was a ghost in the digital age, a craftsman from a different time. She finally found a small, faded entry for a shop tucked away in an old, quiet part of town, a place that felt frozen in time. The shop was everything she imagined: dusty, smelling of aged wool and leather, filled with the quiet dignity of a forgotten era. An old man, with kind eyes and hands gnarled by years of precise work, looked up from his sewing machine. This was Mr. Fitzwilliam. He was initially wary, his eyes sizing her up with a quiet suspicion. But when Alara, her voice hushed, asked about her suit, the wariness melted away. She took off her jacket and laid it on his counter. His frail hands, which had once shaped cloth for the city's elite, trembled slightly as he ran them over the fabric. A wave of profound nostalgia and sorrow washed over his face. "Ah, the sterling design," he murmured, his voice a soft rasp. "I thought this piece was lost to time." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "The sterling design?" "Yes," he said, his gaze distant. "I made this for Julian Sterling's father, many years ago. It was a one-of-a-kind design, a tribute to his vision for the company. He called it The Architect." A gasp escaped Alara's lips. The suit wasn't just a coincidence, it was a direct tribute to the Sterling family legacy. But the tailor wasn't finished. He looked at her with a deeply personal expression, a mixture of recognition and heartbreak. "I made another one," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on her. "A replica, almost identical. A gift. I gave it to a young designer I was mentoring, a brilliant, spirited boy with a future as bright as a star. He was so proud of it. He wore it everywhere. His name was David Vance." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, her carefully constructed understanding of her past shattering into 1,000 pieces. The suit wasn't just a link to the Sterling family. It was a ghost of her own father, a man she had only ever known through faded photographs and her mother's stories. Her father, David Vance, and Julian's father, the titan of Sterling and Finch, were connected by the suit. This one, powerful piece of cloth. The coincidence was now a mystery, a trail of breadcrumbs leading her back into her own family's past, and deeper into the dangerous heart of the corporate conspiracy. Alara left the tailor's shop in a daze, the smell of old wool and the echo of Mr. Fitzwilliam's words still clinging to her. Her father, David Vance, Julian Sterling's father. The suit. The connections were no longer abstract, but deeply personal, woven into the very fabric of her family's history. She felt an urgent need to know more, to understand the truth behind a father she had lost so young. She went to her mother's home, a quiet, modest apartment filled with the warmth of her childhood memories. Her mother, a gentlewoman named Clara, was tending to her small garden of potted herbs. Alara sat her down. The old photo albums of her father spread out on the coffee table. She showed her mother the suit, the one she had proudly worn on her first day. Clara's eyes welled up with tears. "Oh, Alara," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He loved that suit, said it was his masterpiece, his gift from a dear friend." Alara then cautiously mentioned Mr. Fitzwilliam, the tailor, and the name she had never heard before: Julian Sterling's father. Clara's face, usually so serene, tightened with a mix of pain and resentment. She confirmed that David Vance, her father, was indeed a brilliant designer, but his career was cut short by a failed business partnership. "They had a falling out," Clara said, her voice turning cold. "Your father and his business partner. It was over a contract, a deal that would have made their small fashion house a success. But the partner betrayed him, sold the designs behind his back, and your father's company went bankrupt. He was heartbroken." Alara's mind raced. "His partner's name? Do you remember it?" Her mother looked at her, a bitter smile on her face. "Of course. Bartholomew Sinclair, the same man who, years later, founded Atlas Ventures. He's a monster." "Alara," He built his empire on the ashes of your father's dreams. Alara felt the blood run cold. Atlas Ventures, the rival company she was investigating, the company that was trying to bring down Sterling and Finch, the same company that was being fed inside information by a traitor within her own firm. It was all connected. A vicious, decades-old corporate rivalry that had destroyed her father's life and was now threatening Julian Sterling's. The suit was more than a coincidence. It was a key, a silent witness to a bitter betrayal that had scarred two families. The story was no longer a corporate intrigue. It was a personal vendetta. And Alara was now standing in the center of it, a pawn in a game that started long before she was born. Alara's world had been turned upside down. The financial conspiracy she was investigating at Sterling and Finch was no longer just a professional matter. It was a ghost from her family's past, a shadow cast by the man who had destroyed her father's dreams. Bartholomew Sinclair, founder of Atlas Ventures. The name was a poison on her tongue. Back in her sterile office, the numbers and data took on a new, sinister meaning. She looked at the hidden transactions, the complex web of shell corporations, and saw not just a corporate crime, but a personal vendetta. Sinclair wasn't just trying to acquire Sterling and Finch. He was trying to dismantle it, to erase the legacy of a man he once considered a rival. And the traitor inside, the one feeding him information, was a direct accomplice in this long-gestating plan for vengeance. The thought of Marcus Thorne's cold, predatory smile made her blood run hot with a mix of fear and righteous anger. He wasn't just a petty, jealous co-worker. He was an agent of her father's betrayer. The threats, the sabotage, the dismissals, they were all part of a larger, more malicious scheme. The stakes were now higher than ever. It wasn't just about her job, it was about her father's honor, her family's name, and the very foundation of the company that had a strange, almost fated connection to her life. Alara knew she couldn't face this alone. The web of conspiracy was too vast, the players too powerful. There was only one person she could turn to: Julian Sterling, the man who wore the same suit, the man whose father was a key figure in her own family's tragedy. The moment she had seen him in that hallway, a silent current had passed between them, a shared destiny that she was only now beginning to understand. The suit was not just a symbol of their connection, but a call to action. She had to tell him everything, the full, heartbreaking story of their father's connection, the bitter rivalry, and the lingering shadow of Bartholomew Sinclair. The truth, once so elusive, was now a weapon, and she was ready to use it. Alara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she walked toward the executive floor for the second time since her fateful first day. This time, there were no hushed whispers, no curious glances, only the quiet, determined echo of her own footsteps. Her hand, trembling slightly, hovered over the button for the 30th floor. She had to do this. The truth was too heavy a burden to carry alone, and Julian Sterling was the only person who could possibly understand. Ms. Davies, Julian's assistant, was a fortress of a woman, but Alara's quiet plea and the desperate urgency in her eyes convinced her to grant a moment. "He's in a meeting," Ms. Davies said, "but I'll see what I can do." Julian hunched over a mountain of paperwork, looked up as Alara was ushered into his expansive office. He saw the same suit, but this time he saw past it, into the deep, troubled sea of her eyes. Her usual quiet confidence was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability. As they finalized the details, Julian looked at Alara, his stormy eyes reflecting a newfound respect and admiration. "You know, your father would be proud," he said, his voice low. "He was a brilliant designer, but his real legacy was his courage." Alara's heart swelled with a mix of pride and fierce resolve. The suit, the one that had started it all, was no longer just a memory. It was a promise to right the wrongs of the past, to fight for the future of Sterling and Finch, and to finally bring her father's betrayer to justice. The new era at Sterling and Finch was more than a change in leadership. It was a shift in philosophy. Julian, with Alara by his side, had implemented policies that prioritized integrity and collaboration, transforming the once stiff corporate culture into a vibrant and innovative workspace. They were no longer just a financial powerhouse, they were a community built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Alara didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out her findings in a clear, concise torrent of words, a story of financial deceit, corporate espionage, and a personal vendetta. She explained the connections to Bartholomew Sinclair, the founder of Atlas Ventures, and the undeniable proof she had against Marcus Thorne. She then took a deep breath and told him about the tailor, about her father, David Vance, and the suit. Ilara's new role as Director of Strategic Analysis was a testament to her talent, but it was also a reflection of Julian's trust. Her office, now a hub of fresh ideas and forward-thinking strategies, was a constant source of inspiration for the entire company. She no longer felt like an outsider, but a core part of the legacy she and Julian were building together. The trap was set. Julian, with the calm precision of a general, initiated the first phase of their plan. He held a seemingly impromptu meeting with senior analysts, including Marcus Thorne, to discuss a fictitious acquisition. Ilara sat quietly, a silent observer, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She watched Marcus's face, a mask of feigned interest, as Julian detailed the plan. The fabricated report, with its deliberately placed flaw, was left in a place where only Marcus could find it. Now, all they could do was wait. One evening, after a successful company-wide presentation, Julian found Ilara on her balcony, a small private space she had created with potted plants and a comfortable chair. The city lights below twinkled like a million stars, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of their space. Ilara felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. His words were more than just an offer of help. They were a declaration of trust, a promise of partnership. As they began to share their findings, a professional alliance quickly blossomed into something more personal. The shared purpose, the late nights spent piecing together a broken past, the mutual respect for each other's intelligence and tenacity, all of it created a bond that felt both fated and earned. The suit, once a source of embarrassment and confusion, was now a testament to their destiny, a symbol of a new beginning built on the ashes of an old betrayal. "They're a good team," Julian said, leaning against the railing. "We're a good team." The next 48 hours were a crucible of suspense. Ilara and Julian worked late, their tension a palpable presence in the otherwise quiet office. They monitored the company's network, watching for any unusual activity from Marcus's terminal. Late on the second night, a subtle flag went up. A file transfer, disguised as a routine data backup, was initiated from Marcus's computer to an external server. The IP address led to a private network owned by Bartholomew Sinclair's Atlas Ventures. The trap had been sprung. They had him. Ilara smiled, a genuine, joyful expression that made her eyes sparkle. "We are," she agreed. I think our fathers would have been proud. My father called it the architect," Julian finally said, his voice barely a whisper. He was a designer, too, not of suits, but of companies. He believed in building things to last. But he also had a secret, a regret that haunted him to his last day, a business deal, a betrayal. He never told me the full story. Julian's gaze softened. I know they would have been. They believed in building things that last, not just companies, but something more, a legacy of honor. He reached out and gently took her hand, his touch sending a warm current through her. It was a gesture of profound affection and a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had been growing between them since the day they met. Julian wasted no time. The following morning, Marcus Thorne walked into work, his face a picture of smug satisfaction, believing his plan was in motion. He was instead met by Julian Sterling, Ilara Vance, and a team of security and legal officers waiting for him in his office. The look on Marcus's face, as Julian laid out the full extent of his betrayal, was one of pure, unadulterated shock. The smug smile vanished, replaced by a cold terror as he realized his carefully constructed web of lies had been meticulously unraveled. The suit, the symbol of their fated meeting and the ghost of their father's past, was still an ever-present reminder, but it was no longer a burden of a tragic history. It was a beacon of a shared legacy, a promise of a future they would build together. As they stood there, looking out at the city they had helped to save, they knew their story was just beginning. The new beginning was more than a professional venture. It was the foundation of their lives. Julian and Ilara's partnership, forged in the crucible of a corporate battle, had blossomed into a profound personal connection. They found a rhythm together, a quiet understanding that transcended words. Their evenings were now often spent in Julian's office, not poring over financial reports, but simply talking. They shared stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and the shared legacy of their fathers that had brought them together in such an extraordinary way. With Julian's support, Ilara no longer felt like a solitary mouse in a cat-and-mouse game. They were a team, a formidable force of two, united by a shared history and a common enemy. Their late-night sessions in Julian's office, fueled by black coffee and a relentless determination, became a strategic war room. They meticulously cross-referenced Ilara's findings with Sterling and Finch's internal security logs and Julian's own recollections of his father's final, troubled days. The suit, once a point of contention and mystery, was now a treasured artifact. Julian had it professionally preserved, a silent testament to the beginning of their journey. He often spoke of his father, the architect, and the vision he had for the company, a vision Ilara was now helping him fulfill. She, in turn, found a new sense of peace and pride in her father's memory, knowing his legacy was not one of betrayal, but of enduring integrity. "You underestimated us, Marcus," Julian said, his voice as cold and sharp as the glass in his office. "You thought we were just a company, but this is more than a business. It's a legacy, and you tried to poison it." On the anniversary of their first day at Sterling and Finch, Julian surprised Ilara. He led her to a large, empty space on the top floor, a room with a breathtaking 360-degree view of the city. "This," he said, his voice filled with a quiet emotion, "is where the architect's first project will be built." "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "What is it?" He gestured to the vast, open space. "We are going to build a foundation here, a nonprofit dedicated to mentoring young entrepreneurs. Just like our fathers were, we will give them the tools, the support, and the integrity they need to build their own legacies. We will be the architects of a new generation." The full scope of the conspiracy came to light in the ensuing investigation. Marcus, faced with irrefutable evidence, confessed everything. His greed, his jealousy, and his long-standing arrangement with Bartholomew Sinclair were all laid bare. The corporate world was rocked by the scandal, but Sterling and Finch, under Julian's decisive leadership, weathered the storm. Ilara's eyes welled up with tears as she looked at him. This was more than a business venture. It was a promise to heal the wounds of the past, to honor their fathers, and to build a future based on trust, collaboration, and a shared sense of destiny. As Julian took her hand, a simple gesture of affection and partnership, Ilara knew that the story of their suit had come full circle. It had brought them together, led them through darkness, and was now a beacon guiding them toward a brighter, more hopeful tomorrow. Their story, the story of the suit, was the story of two people bound not by coincidence, but by a shared purpose to build a legacy that would last. 2 years had passed since the Architects Foundation was launched. The nonprofit, housed in the same breathtaking space on the top floor, was now a thriving hub of innovation and hope. Young entrepreneurs, with stars in their eyes and fresh ideas in their hearts, moved through the building, guided by mentors and supported by a community built on the principles of integrity and collaboration. The very principles Ilara and Julian had fought to restore. As she worked, she began to notice a pattern. A series of small, seemingly insignificant transactions that, when traced, led to a complex web of shell corporations. It was a whisper of a financial conspiracy, a ghost in the machine. A cold, unsettling realization dawned on her. Someone within Sterling and Finch was feeding information to their competitor. The stakes of her job had just been raised from professional to deeply personal. It was no longer just about making a good impression. It was about protecting the very company she had just joined, and perhaps her own future. Ilara, now a partner at Sterling and Finch, stood on the balcony of her old office, which had become their shared space. She was looking out at the setting sun, a familiar ritual. The city, which once seemed so daunting, now felt like a part of their own story, a vibrant backdrop to the lives they had built together. Julian came and stood beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist. They discovered a new layer to the conspiracy. Marcus Thorne wasn't just leaking information, he was strategically manipulating the company's stock price. He would subtly spread rumors of financial instability, creating a small but significant dip in value, which Bartholomew Sinclair's Atlas Ventures would then capitalize on. It was a slow, methodical strangulation, a game of patience and malice that had been playing out for months. Remember that first day he asked, his voice a low rumble? The whispers, the scrutiny, and the suit. In the end, Julian and Alara stood together, looking out at the city from his office window. The crisis was averted, the company was safe, and a decades-old vendetta had finally been brought to justice. But their journey was far from over. Alara's father, David Vance, and Julian's, the architect, were connected by more than just a suit. They were the architects of a new era for Sterling and Finch, one built not on a foundation of betrayal, but on a partnership forged in trust, courage, and a shared, fated destiny. Alara smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I remember thinking I was in trouble," she said, her voice soft with affection. "I never imagined it would lead to this." He stood up and walked to the window, the same spot where Alara had first seen him. He turned to face her, his storm-colored eyes now filled with a shared understanding, a quiet recognition of their intertwined destinies. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was a suit of destiny. And now, it's time for the next chapter. He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring with a single, perfectly cut diamond. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Will you be my partner in life, my co-architect in everything?" A month had passed since the Marcus Thorne affair and the collapse of Atlas Ventures. The financial world was still reeling from the scandal, but for Sterling and Finch, it had become a story of recovery and triumph. Julian had shown decisive leadership, removed corrupt employees, and ushered in a new era of transparency and integrity. The firm had weathered the storm, stronger than ever. Alara's eyes filled with joyful tears as she looked at him, at the man whose destiny was so intertwined with hers, at the man she had come to love with all her heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes, Julian, with his deep understanding of the company's internal mechanisms, and Alara, with her sharp, fresh perspective on data, began to build their counterattack. They knew they couldn't simply fire Marcus. He was too well connected, too skilled at covering his tracks. They needed to expose him, to catch him in the act, and to do it in a way that would not only prove his guilt, but also reveal the full scope of Sinclair's long-standing vendetta. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, Alara knew that the story of their suit had finally reached its conclusion. It was a story of two families, of two destinies, of a tragic past and a triumphant future. The suit, the charcoal gray masterpiece that had started it all, was no longer just a piece of clothing. It was a testament to love, a symbol of a shared purpose, and the beginning of their final, most beautiful design, a life built together, a legacy that would last for generations. The wedding was a celebration not just of two people, but of two legacies finally united. It was a beautiful ceremony held in a sun-drenched garden, with Alara wearing a simple, elegant gown and Julian in a suit, a tribute to the charcoal gray masterpiece that had brought them together. Their mothers, Clara Vance and Mrs. Sterling, for she is not named, sat side by side, clasping hands, tears of joy streaming silently. The old hostility, the old bitterness, had melted away, replaced by a new bond of love and respect. Alara was no longer a junior analyst. She had been promoted to Director of Strategic Analytics, a position Julian had personally created to take advantage of her unique talents and acumen. Her new office, across the street from Julian's, was filled with light and had a view of the city. It was a space that not only reflected her advancement, but also symbolized Julian's absolute trust. After their honeymoon, they returned to the city, to the life they had built together. Alara and Julian, now husband and wife, worked together seamlessly, each one's acumen and vision complementing the other. Sterling and Finch not only thrived financially, but also became known for its culture of integrity and innovation. The Architects Foundation, under their guidance, has helped dozens of young entrepreneurs, each carrying a piece of the legacy that Alara and Julian created together. A profound silence filled the room. Julian listened intently, his expression unreadable. She had laid her entire soul bare. her professional life, and her personal history, at the feet of a man she barely knew. One night, as they prepared for bed, Alara looked at the ring glistening on her finger. "This ring is so beautiful," she whispered. Julian smiled, pulling her into his arms. "It's just a symbol," he said. "The final design. It's the life we're building together. It's the legacy we're creating. It's the love we're nurturing." On a late afternoon, as the city below sparkled like a carpet of precious stones, Julian walked into Alara's office. She was reviewing a new report on a potential expansion project. He stood beside her, watching the sunset together. "My father," he said softly, "believed that a company wasn't built on numbers alone. It was built on people. He would be so proud of what we've done." Alara. And Alara knew he was right. Their story wasn't about a suit, a plot, or a coincidence of fate. It was about two souls finding each other in a sea of people, two hearts healed by love built on truth, courage, and a shared belief in the power of a united legacy. Their life is the ultimate design, and every day is a new chapter in their great love story. They decided to set a trap, a false trail of information. A fabricated report about a major new investment deal would be leaked to Marcus. The report would be designed to look authentic, full of complex financial jargon and impressive projections. But it would contain a critical, easily identifiable flaw. If Marcus took the bait and passed the information to Sinclair, it would be a direct link, undeniable proof of his treason. The plan was risky. If it failed, it could compromise their entire investigation and put both their careers and the company itself in peril. But the stakes were too high to play it safe. Alara turned to him, her eyes sparkling. "My father was the same," she said. "He always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard." They didn't talk about love, but their deep understanding and respect had created an unbreakable bond. It was a relationship built from a tragedy of the past and forged in a shared fight for a better future. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice firm and decisive, "you are not alone in this anymore. This is no longer your investigation. It is ours. We will uncover this truth together." The suit, a symbol of their chance and destiny, had now become a cherished keepsake. It was more than just a piece of clothing. It is a reminder of a conspiracy that was exposed, an old feud that was resolved, and a partnership that was born from the ashes of betrayal. Alara Vance and Julian Sterling are not just the heirs to a legacy, they are the architects of a new era, one built on truth, courage, and a shared belief in the power of integrity.